All right, welcome back. My name is Chris Sachinelli. I'm partner at Bootstrapper Capital, and I get to build, buy, and sell simple, profitable businesses every single day. And today we are going to be talking about preliminary due diligence, what it is, why it's important, how to approach it, and where it should fall in terms of your acquisition process and your acquisition pipeline as you're going out to look to acquire businesses for your personal portfolio. Right. For those of you that are joining us on YouTube, this is a part of our buy sell bootcamp inside of the Bootstrapper Capital community. And as always, I'm going to be doing my best to go through this in one shot, one take, no edits, and we're about to get into it right now. So what is preliminary due diligence? Due diligence, specifically preliminary due diligence, is simply the concept of looking at a company or looking at the deal that you're about to acquire and gather all of the relevant information that you need to be able to make a good, timely decision of whether or not this is something that you actually should consider or move forward with, or at least minimum take some time, invest some time into a conversation before you go into the process, right? So it is quite literally the preliminary part of your due diligence process. Due diligence is simply gathering information and getting yourself what you need to be able to make a good, qualified decision. And we do have a checklist that you would follow in terms of completing due diligence, right? So this is just all of the stuff that you're going to be doing up front, and there's a why behind it, right? So realistically, I think preliminary due diligence is oftentimes underrated in terms of its importance, right? So why is it an important step? First and foremost, as an investorpreneur, we're all about risk mitigation, right? So the entire investpreneur process is all about taking risk off the table, right? If you can mitigate risk, then you're going to be able to maximize your upside, right? So everything that we do is intentional in terms of mitigating risk. And the entire due diligence process, period, right, is all about mitigation of risk. And preliminary due diligence is a great way to take risk off the table fast, or to kill something that's bad on the vine fast, so that you could better focus your time, effort, energy, and resources onto the good things, right? So you could focus there and make good, timely decisions there if this is something that you don't want to do. So it's realistically going to help you identify things, specifically things like deal breakers, for example, early and often, right? Kill it on the vine fast, right? It also helps you save time and focus your resources on realistically the most viable opportunities, right? So if you can get the bad off the table, then you're going to be able to be in a position where you can focus all of your effort and energy and resources on the good, right? And that's going to help you do a better job. It also, because you're doing this proactively and because this is a preliminary process, by the time, if this happens to be a good deal, like say this is one of the good deals, right? You didn't kill it on the vine, you left it on the vine. Say this is a deal that you left on the vine and you're going to move it forward and you want to continue to move it through your process. It allowed you the efficiency of gathering all the things that you need, collecting your thoughts appropriately, right? Really being able to rank and retrieve where your focus and energy and intentions are going to be as you actually move into the true diligence process, right? So it's actually like a great way to proactively almost get yourself better prepared so that when you get into this opportunity where you'll have 30, 60, 90 days or whatever your exclusion period is to complete your diligence, you can do it better, right? So it's like almost like practice to a certain extent, and practice does make perfect. So for those reasons, it's a really good thing. It also gives you a better understanding of the business prior to getting into the conversation. And because you're in a position of having a better understanding of the business, it helps you paint a better picture of how you want to position it, and inclusive of how you want to position it, how you want to potentially, value that business, right? So from positioning, we know that value is a matter of valuation is a matter of price, but it's also a matter of terms, right? And everything comes from a level of positioning. You change your perspective, you change your approach. So by completing this preliminary due diligence process, it allows you to collect the appropriate level of information to potentially shift your perspective, which will then hopefully change your approach in terms of approaching this deal or approaching the conversation. All of it at the end of the day, again, where we started, risk mitigation, all of this stuff, it's all about identifying risk fast or potential risk, realized risk, potential risk, etc. And then inclusive in risk, intrinsic within the risk identification and the risk mitigation is also then the maximization of opportunity or upside. So you're also able to proactively identify where the good is, right? So it's not just bad, it's also you want to understand the good and appreciate the good as well. So it gives you an opportunity to do that, right? Always conduct preliminary due diligence before making an offer or before getting into an LOI, a letter of intent, right? So it is a really important step. Also inclusive in this, you're likely going to be having conversations or calls. I highly suggest that you go through completing the due diligence process prior to getting on a phone or having a first level of engagement or engagement conversation with the buyer, with the buy side, right? You just want to do your homework, right? You don't want to show up for the test unprepared, right? And, first impressions do matter, right? Of course, especially as we're positioning ourselves into a deal. So for all of those reasons and definitely more, it's really important. So it's all about positioning yourself appropriately, right? By completing your preliminary due diligence, we've already discussed the fact that it's reducing the risk, it's removing the risk, it's allowing you to kill the bad deals on the vine fast, right? So you can focus on the good. So get out of bad investments, right? Rule number one of investing is don't lose money. Rule number two, look at rule number one. Rule number three, go back to rule number one, right? You just don't want to lose money. There's no called strikes in this game of investing. So take your time, diligence appropriately. I'd rather you over diligence a deal than buy a deal bad, right? All of it is putting yourself in a better position in terms of making good informed decisions, right? We constantly promote the concept you got to make good, timely decisions. Sometimes the best decision you can make is like, I don't have enough time to do this. Or, you should never feel rushed in a deal, right? You should never feel the constraint of time into a deal. Just don't do the deal, right? It's easier to say no, right? Feel comfortable doing that and always position yourself with as much information as possible. Again, you change your perspective, you change your approach, right? So from collecting the information and positioning your perspective and positioning your approach, it really allows you to look at the seller realistically of the deal here, because you're a buy side buyer, to determine whether or not they're a credible seller, or at the same time as you're having the conversation, it allows you to position yourself as being a credible buyer, right? So you're kind of doing two sides of the table here. I know that this bullet only acknowledges the one, which is positioning yourself. However, you gotta acknowledge both sides of the table. So by diligencing and completing the preliminary diligence, you're able to get into a conversation. You're able to read the conversation. You're able to look at the sell side and say, hey, does this person know what they're doing? Where are they really at in this conversation? How serious are they in the process? What is their needs? What are the why, right? Understand their perspective, because it takes two sides of the table to get a good deal done, right? And the better that somebody could take the accountability of better understanding the other side of the table, the faster both sides could get to the same side of the table and a better deal gets done, right? So that ultimately lands you in this last bullet point, which is improving your ability to negotiate a good deal, right? Because you're identifying proactively areas where maybe there's some weaknesses. You're identifying proactively where there's opportunities and upsides and synergies in terms of like the why, in terms of why you would like to do the deal. Some of those things you're going to want to share. All of those things you're going to want to know, right? So all of these give put you in a competitive advantage, which is why you need to invest the time, effort, and energy to do this and take the actions, right? You're always positioning yourself as best as possible to be able to get the best possible deal done. And then the best way to do that in terms of getting the best possible deal done is to overcommit into the process, overcommit into the deal, right? Overcommit into doing the hard work, and then leverage what you know to make the deal win for everybody, right? Make it a win-win opportunity for both sides of the tables, buy side and sell side. And that's typically how you can position yourself while you're positioning others. Do it for yourself in order to do it for others to be able to get to the best possible outcomes. Right. So as you're going through this preliminary due diligence, like what are you looking at? What does this process look like? Right. So I should probably have led with the other slide first. I'm going to jump to it and then I'm going to jump back to this. The thing I want to emphasize is, don't over invest time early into the diligence, right? So this is a preliminary due diligence. So meaning like oftentimes this message can come across because it is so important and we really harp on the level of importance. Sometimes the message gets received in the communication loop as like invest a ton of time and experience paralysis by analysis, right? So I want you to be comfortable losing the deal, right? Always be comfortable losing the deal, meaning like never jump into a deal that you're not confident in, or you haven't followed the process of, or you haven't collected the right level of information in. Like never jump into a bad situation and be comfortable losing the deal there. But don't overcomplicate the process and don't like beat a dead horse, right? Don't go paralysis by analysis and over research or over diligence, and invest too much time and have a good deal die that way in a bad way, right? So you're going to have an opportunity after you determine whether or not this is a process you want to move forward with, to then actually commit through an LOI to have the right and the privilege to actually do a deep dive diligence, right? So don't think that this is like a one and done type of thing. This is just a preliminary thing. And through this whole process, you're trying to position yourself as best as possible to make good, timely decisions. But you do want to get to a decision. You want to move the conversation forward. You want to move the process forward, right? Time does kill all deals. So if it is a good deal, you don't want it to die on the vine because you took too much time, right? You just don't want to jump into a deal that you didn't, invest the appropriate level of time into, right? So now that like, I'm not going to over exert myself into these things and overcomplicate it. What am I doing in terms of my preliminary due diligence? And honestly, if you budget your time appropriately and you get your process down, you could do this fairly efficiently and effectively. And the reality is now that we have things like ChatGPT and other, AI cognitive applications, this is just going to become that much more easy realistically in this new world that we're living. But you're looking for things like industry research, right? So you want to be, subject matter expert and having a level of awareness in terms of the micro specific industry that you're in, as well as the macro environment of that industry, right? So like, what are the outside market effects that are going to ultimately affect this deal, right? So that you can identify any risks, right? A lot of what I'm doing in terms of preliminary due diligence is proactive risk mitigation, right? So it's easier to look for the bad. It is easier to look for the risk because, again, if you identify the risk, everything else that's left over is upside, is reward, right? So if you get really good at just identifying risk, it also like allows you to focus in kind of efficiently and effectively. So as I'm going through my preliminary due diligence, what I'm usually looking is like risk mitigation or risk, risk factors. So after the industry research, it simply becomes, a high level of financial. Now you don't really necessarily have any information on the business. You use and work with what you have, but you're looking at, comparables, comps, right? So you're going to be trying to research, competitors and market. You're going to be trying to understand where the financials could be. You're going to be potentially putting into a simple spreadsheet some level of a financial forecast, right? You just want to get comfortable with the numbers could potentially be as you're going through the financial analysis from a high level. And then you want to back into, what it would look like if you were to underwrite the deal, so proactively what that would look like, back of napkin math, right? And we have another video on that goes into that in detail, and just get yourself into a level of comfortability as to whether or not this is a deal that you could do, right? So from there, customer analysis, this is going to be something that, maybe you're able to do in a preliminary due diligence, maybe you're not, right? There's different ways that you could look for the customers. You go to the website, see what customer testimonials are, etc. You go to social, you try to find folks that are posting, try to identify customers that way. You go to the trust pilots of the world, the review sites of the world, right? So any of the ways in which you could potentially garner some intel on what the existing customer base is, what the existing sentiment of that customer base is, right? Those are the types of things that you're going to want to do prior to getting into your initial conversation, right? And you're going to want to know kind of like a level of parameters. I also oftentimes will leverage things like YouTube videos, podcasts, media, things that have been casted out there by the team, right? Oftentimes you can find a lot of this information in like more candid types of conversations or interviews or things of that nature, things that get shared, because at the time there's no reason why they wouldn't want to or whatever the case is, and then sometimes it just gets forgotten or lost in the sauce in a sense, and you can pick it up, you could sift through the meatballs, right? Competitive analysis, definitively, I would actually bump these up. This isn't necessarily in any sort of like necessary order. I would probably bump competitive analysis up while you're doing industry and financial. I would start to identify the competitors that are popping up through the research, right? I would keep in a list of it. And then after you do those things, go back to that list, do like a little bit more of a deep dive, to see if you could find additionals that missed the cracks. And then, go to that list and actually do a deep dive into the competitive analysis. Look at things of like, what are the competitors pricing at, right? Have the competitors disclosed any financials, right? What does that look like? Socials, look, any sort of leading indicators, market indicators, anything that allows you to benchmark where the market is, where the business is, where the competitors are, that's public information, and then use that to then benchmark against the deal that you're looking at. Right, that gives you a better sense of where the business is in terms of market, and then also what what you're going against. If you decide to pull the trigger and get to an acquisition, right? Sometimes if there's no competitors, that's a good thing. Sometimes if there's no competitors, it's like why, right? Why is that type of thing? Oftentimes that's not really the case. Like typically most deals, especially in the space that we play, usually a lot of competitors for the most part. Operations analysis is typically difficult. It's going to be difficult for you to do in terms of a preliminary due diligence. I mean, it's important we put it in there because like operations is so important in terms of risk, right? And valuation and adding or applying a risk ratio. So I always want to flag it for you for sure, but it's going to be difficult, right? It's going to be fairly difficult. What you can do preliminary is map out what you think the operational components of the business would be, so that you can have a high level sketch of what you think the business system is, right? So follow the throughput. And you can identify where you think some constraints on that business system may be and proactively flag them, and then bring those as talking points as well, right? So you've kind of thought through what it would look like. And a great way to do this would just be like, put yourself in the shoes of, hey, I bought this business. What does it look like today? And kind of just create a brainstorm what you think it is, like free flow sketch, right? Schematic. And then legal and regulatory. This is actually a great place to pay attention to, because business, regulatory, legal regulatory environment does change, and a good business can very quickly become a bad business. In fact, I was in a deal not too long ago where that was the case. It was a business that was, pushing off like a significant amount of cash flow, and the next thing there's quite a bit of regulatory risk in the form of changes that pretty much could have made this business completely obsolete overnight, right? So that's a huge risk ratio, and you want to be aware of those types of things. And that is fairly easily researchable through just like simple, Google News type of stuff, and then industry specific publications and industry specific news sources, right? So that's a high level of like what you're going to work through in terms of completing your due diligence, preliminary due diligence process. And you want to keep it all organized, like set up a Notion, something of a similar sort, work it through, complete like a semi quasi deal room, and keep your thoughts organized, come up with a thesis at the end, right? So you're going to want to take all of this stuff, you're going to work through the process, collect the information, and then after you collect the information, review and digest the information and write down a thesis. And write down a thesis statement of, I believe this, right? Because of this. So this will be the case. I will offer this, right? Just put together a statement, right? A thesis statement that kind of collectively puts together all of your thoughts. You're going to want to be able to get comfortable with that statement. And as you approach your conversations and as you get onto your call, you're also going to want to go back and look at your risk, your risk checklist, right? So as you're working through each of these things, as mentioned earlier, you're paying attention to all the risks, right, that are popping up. And you're going to want to keep a running risk list, right? So you're going to want to document all of the constraints on the business, all the risks on the business, all the concerns, right? And when you get into a conversation or when you get into the call, you'll have your thesis statement. So you kind of know your positioning and you're able to position for both sides of the table, as we discussed earlier. But then also you're going to be able to identify and acknowledge some of the risks. And by going to the risks, you can quickly see whether or not or where the business is at, right? It helps you also validate and confirm the sell side, the seller, in terms of like what their response is to these. So you could better judge the individual. And then while you're working through it as well, if there's a good response, if there's, you could start to mitigate some of these risks. And then if not, it's also a great way to start to beat up on the deal a little bit and position yourself for a better potential price and terms, which is really just valuation, right? So for all of those reasons and definitely more, preliminary due diligence is super important. However, don't overinvest time, right? Because again, if it's a deal that you're not going to, if it's a bad deal, you're going to kill it on the vine fast. So again, you don't have to like overly invest yourself into preliminary due diligence to find out it's a bad deal. You're going to find out pretty fast. You're going to feel it in your bones pretty fast whether or not something's up, and you're going to kill it on the vine. Or you're going to be like, it's pretty much good. It's moving forward. You're completing this to the best of your ability, and you're positioning yourself in the right way to get into the deal. And then if you do decide to move forward and you have the opportunity to move forward into the deal, you'll be able to invest heavily into a real formal, official diligence process on the back side. If you liked and enjoyed this content, please let us know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. As always, we're trying to build up this channel. And if you are in the boot camp, appreciate you for taking the time. Everything is structured, and we're going to continue to work through this process. Till next time, talk to you soon.